All right, folks, I'm back. Um, so a couple of things. The Sandy had said that maybe the extraneous link got created when she sent out the save the date email somehow or other, that it created a link. So um, I see on my screen, there were over 300 people in the room. I think the registration was like somewhere around 297 or this or that. Um, but I was asked to make an announcement. If you're sharing someone else's login that you didn't register for the class, can you just type your name and company in the chat box? If you registered and got the link, you don't have to do that. I don't need 307 people to do that, but there's somewhere on the order of 15-ish or so that did not go through the registration process. So GDOT wants to kind of keep track of all the folks that attended. So I'm going to take a minute and talk about some of the things in the chat pod. Then it's going to take a little step back, so to speak. But the first one was from Amanda back at 10:48, if you're following along. And she's asking, or commenting about the trail where we're closing a portion of that. And, you could clear it via de minimis. Was the instance you mentioned argued and countered by FHWA, or the need? So on that one, Amanda, I was making a case that we qualified for an exception because we were only temporarily impacting the trail. We met all those other criteria. So we didn't even get to de minimis. If I would not have won the exception argument, then I would have went to saying it's only a minor use and still had some of those same considerations about closing the trail and this and that. But again, I think, and for those in the environmental world, you're probably understanding this down in the weeds discussion. But, for the engineers and such, again, just make sure that, you're talking to the environmental folks. So Jeff Henry is asking about replacement of eligible historic bridges. Jeff, I would tell you that's a thing we deal with a lot, and we're definitely going to talk about that during one of the or all of the in-person environmental in-depth trainings. But the most challenging situation is where a bridge contributes to a district, and how you do or don't use the bridges programmatic in those situations. But I would suggest if you've got some things you want to talk about, maybe offline, send me an email or give me a call, and we can talk about that a little bit more. It's going to take a little bit to get into that one. So Derek Allen, right? It's not only just minimization or avoidance, it could also be enhancement. If I take a swing set and I replace it with a better swing set somewhere else, that's certainly within the realm of de minimis or net effect after mitigation. James, some argue that impacts to historic properties disqualify the property's historic classification. James, I'm not a historian, but I, certainly understand the 106 process to the degree that, and teach that in my 4F training. I think we have adverse effects to historic properties all the time that don't disqualify its eligibility. And again, if that's something you want to get down in the weeds on, let's have a separate discussion. So paging down through there, for those that stayed on the line, you heard Eric and I talking. So Eric's question at 11 a.m. or his comment talks about temporary easement and doing something more than just grading and grassing, a drainage ditch or something like that. And would that be a 4F? Would that qualify for the exception, or, well, let's take it this way. So in order to qualify for the exception, we have to meet those criteria. And I told Eric that over the break, I had a similar question come up with doing a training session for Alaska DOT a couple of months ago, and they wanted to leave some kind of thing on the area that they were using temporarily within the park or within the refuge, I think it was, or something. And it was, some kind of a post or some kind of something that stuck out from the ground, not anywhere near like the size of a traffic controller cabinet or something like that. And I came back to them and said, in my opinion, what the official jurisdiction's input in on that is probably where I would make the decision or not based on that. If they don't have a problem with it, if they say, that's not a big deal to leave this little post sticking out of the ground, or in Eric's case, it's not, a big deal for us to have a ditch there where it was flat before. There's no real definition of what you can or can't do on that property to still say it's qualifies for the exception. If you can't qualify for the exception, you have a use, and then you've got to evaluate whether your use is de minimis, programmatic, or something else. But in the scheme of things, as I see it, it's easier to do an exception versus doing a de minimis, which is easier than doing a programmatic. David Borchardt, similar comment from Jeff. David, I'm going to defer that discussion to the in-depth environmental class. That's a great question, but it's way down in the weeds for this engineering group. But again, I can put some stuff together and respond after the session also. Mr. Roundtree, my goodness, it's been 100 years. And then some other folks signing in. Okay, so I'm gonna get back out of this one and broadcast my screen again. I don't know why it's on that slide. What slide are we on? Okay, so we're back into de minimis. We did the historic ones. Okay, we are in our park and we did our first example, right? So let's just take this a little bit further and talk more about de minimis and not de minimis and this and that kind of thing. So here's my second example, right? So now I want to do a larger improvement to this east-west facility. Maybe I want to add capacity, add a center turn lane or something or other. So I'm going to take more right of way from the park. I'm going to take some of the parking. I'm going to hit the fence. Depending on how much, I debated how far to put this line up, but let's say we're either encroaching on the playground or, taking the monkey bars or whatever, some of that stuff is. So do folks think I can get to de minimis on a situation like this? And again, give me your thumbs up or thumbs down kind of thing as to yes, de minimis, no de minimis. If you want to play that it depends card or the maybe card, give me a different symbol than a thumbs up or thumbs down kind of thing. And remember, net effect after mitigation, which I just said mitigation could be enhancement. The first one was a maybe, was it depends. So that's always what you want to see. Getting some thumbs down and some handshakes and All right, so I put this one up there. To me, this is really an it depends kind of thing. I mean, maybe this is too much, maybe it's not. Um, Obviously, I'd have to do things like replacing the fence or creating a new entrance to the parking lot. The parking in this park doesn't seem to be a priority. Maybe a lot of people walk to this park as opposed to drive. So me taking 10 parking places, I don't think that's going to be more than minor. Me taking the fence and, you know, either impacting that playground or putting my new road much closer to the playground. But what if I relocated some of those playground facilities up into this area where there's, vacant land within the park? Having the playground away from the future multi-lane road, probably a good idea, right? More safer for the kids, this and that. So, this one to me, it's sort of a right on the cusp there as to yes or no. And what I said, based on the Eric comments, what's critical here is what does the OWJ think? Maybe the playground is really in terrible condition. Maybe nobody really uses the playground, kind of thing. So if it is greater than de minimis, if you're one of the ones that voted no, then what about if I put a wall here and I, shrink my right-of-way footprint in half? Does that get me to de minimis? And if so, what's the cost of building that wall versus spending another 12 months of project development time to go through the individual evaluation process? So again, those are things that I'm trying to stress to you. At some point on this spectrum, you're going to go from minor to greater than minor. If I put a road right through the middle, or I put a road, north-south, taking both of the baseball fields and the playground, I mean, at some point, you're going to have to be able to stand in front of a judge if necessary and say with a straight face, yes, Your Honor, we felt this was minor. When de minimis first came out, we had a DOT come to us, came out in August of 2005. In January 2006, an unnamed DOT that starts with O and ends with O and was high in the middle came to us with a scenario that they wanted to take a whole park and replace it somewhere else and do it as a de minimis because net effect after mitigation. The future park better serve the community. We struggled with that one for a while. Again, it was a couple months after de minimis came into existence. But at the end of the day, we came to the decision that we weren't comfortable saying that was a minor use of that resource. But we had another good idea for how they could process that project, and we'll talk about that in another minute or two. Okay, so back into my roadmap. Exceptions, can't get to de minimis. Okay, I got programmatics here. Is there a chance I can do a programmatic and not have to do this individual evaluation? So there are 5 programmatics that exist. The first one from way back in the 70s about the independent bikeway and walkway. Historic bridges 1, number 2. 3 and 4 were these minor involvement projects that back in the day, we used those a lot. Prior to de minimis, we used a lot of the minor involvement ones. These days, they're pretty much the same thing as de minimis. And so most people go to de minimis instead of doing the minor involvement one. There's nothing that says you can't still do the minor involvement if you want to. And when de minimis first came out in 2005, there were many states that didn't use it and kept doing minor involvement programmatics. I did training in Oklahoma in I don't know even when it was. Let's just say it was several years after. Let's say it was like 2009, and they had not done a de minimis. And they rationalize that we've been doing the minor involvement ones for a long time. We know how to do them. We know what the division office will approve. But when you do a programmatic, you still have to look at feasible and prudent avoidance alternatives. Now, your range is much more constrained than if you were doing an individual, but you still have that piece of the puzzle. So ultimately, after some training and a couple of more years, they started doing de minimis, and I haven't seen a minor involvement one in a long time. Although during discussions with Alaska recently, they were going to do a shoulder stabilization project through Denali, and it was going to take 1,000 acres of land. And they were concerned that people wouldn't grasp 1,000 acres is a minor use or is a de minimis use. But that 1,000 acres fell well under the threshold that this minor involvement with Parks One had back in '86, because the park is, tens of thousands of acres worth of park. I think ultimately they went with de minimis and not with the minor involvement, but again, that's something that you potentially could do. The last one, net benefit, came out in 2005, the same year as de minimis. And I got a couple slides on that one. I want to make sure, I give my commercial on that one. Pretty much these days, we do number 2 and number 5. We do the bridges one and we do the net benefit one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those with this group then. So the historic bridges programmatic essentially allows us to replace, rehab, repair, demolish, and replace a historic bridge and go through this programmatic and not have to do an individual. The last bullet there, obviously, if you take the bridge, it's an adverse effect. But because it's already serving a transportation purpose, it's not like you have a ton of alternatives. You're either going to build a new bridge nearby and try to save this one, or you're going to knock this one down and build a new one. So you still have to look at those alternatives. That's what the next slide says. You still have to look at, well, what if I don't do anything? Or what if I rehab it and don't affect its historic integrity? Or what if I build a new location road somewhere else? So, that is your range of alternatives. Those 3 are the 3 you need to look at if you're going to use the bridge programmatic. And if I can rehab the bridge and not compromise its integrity, then I am able to say I don't have a 4F use of that bridge. In most of the cases that I've seen, the bridge ends up being demolished and we build a new structure. But again, we go through that 106 process, and in a situation like this photo here, I mean, the only way you're going to be able to salvage that structure is to build something next to it or maintain some sort of one-way traffic. That's not, it's always going to be width of the structure that is the challenging thing. Obviously that's not going to meet any kind of current standard for a 2-lane roadway. So when you're got bridge replacement projects and the environmental people are asking you for details on building something somewhere else, they're doing that in order to satisfy this programmatic. So, they need you to provide them with enough information that they can make a case to FHWA ultimately that it's not feasible and prudent to avoid. Even though this is a programmatic, we still have to do that process. Mitigation, typically we're going to document this structure. There are instances where we salvage a bridge or move a bridge or, pick up a truss and, stick it on a trail somewhere in the future and all that. And, we have historic bridge management plans and all kind of other things that are aids for us to work on these types of projects. The last one there, make it available for an alternative use. Just recently sat in some discussions with Jim Pomfret and Laura Dahlwood about, the marketing and the website GDOT's creating to, you got to find a local sponsor to take ownership of it. And, sometimes that's challenging, but, in other states, I've had projects where we've moved trusses and put them on a future pedestrian trail. For those that know Chattanooga, the Walnut Street Bridge, originally that bridge was gone. But ultimately, somebody made a case that we could salvage that, and it's a pedestrian facility and part of their bike trail network. And in the winter, they put lights on the bridge, and Santa Claus comes there, and it's tremendous. It's a great outcome that preserved a historic structure. So, again, we use this one all the time, and when you're doing like some of the chat pod there, bridges that contribute to districts and all that. Some of this gets really complex and down in the weeds. GDOT I commend Jim and Eric. They've really, crafted an innovative agreement that looks at those kinds of situations and tries to find ways to use the programmatic and make a de minimis call in the district. And I've promoted that to other states. The marketing thing, we had a discussion recently, and again with Alaska, they had some concerns about transferring liability to locals for a bridge that has lead paint. And, we talked about that too. And if you look at the 4F policy paper in detail, it says, marketing the bridge when it is reasonable or when it's the right thing to do. So, that's something I'm going to continue to talk with Jim about. Maybe there are situations, it's not easy to pick up a concrete structure and move it somewhere else. All right, 11:30. Got to get through some slides. Excuse me. So the net benefit programmatic, you can read what it says, on the slide here, but my feeling is net benefits came out the same time as de minimis, and there was such a excitement and flurry over de minimis that a bunch of people forgot about this net benefit one. So the bottom line for net benefit is there is no impact threshold like there is for de minimis, right? I can have a greater than de minimis use, but I can still do a programmatic. And when you compare, not doing something with a future me doing the project and how that could benefit the community, that's what helps me sell this and, ends up creating situations where I can use this. So, let's go back to this playground graphic that we talked about before. And for those people that were saying no when my line started encroaching on the playground, what if I had something, going this way diagonally and took the whole playground? Again, that's maybe not minor, that's not de minimis. But if I replace that playground up here, maybe that's a benefit to the community or to the resource. If I had a project up in the northwest corner that took the baseball field, maybe what they really need is a soccer field. Maybe people don't play baseball as much anymore. Or maybe, there's a lot of little plants, maybe some of this area is really wet. Maybe the swimming pool doesn't hold water anymore and nobody swims. So again, if I impact something, but given my consultation with the park officials, I find a way to make that a better future resource, depending on what that cost me to do that versus what it would cost me to spend another year or more doing an individual, I want to look at that. I encourage y'all to look at that. And this is where that consultation with the park officials becomes critical. Don't think what's best for them. Maybe nobody parks down here because it's too far to get to the baseball field. And maybe what they really need is, some parking over here outside of the existing park where we could annex some land from the farm and put some parking there or something. So, again, if you're in a situation where you're not comfortable that it's de minimis, this is my last chance. Sorry, this is my last chance in this programmatic realm to not have to do an individual. So I'm preaching to you that you need to spend some time looking at alternatives and enhancements and mitigation and what could I do to make it a better future situation. That project that I didn't say was in Ohio, that's what we ended up doing. We did a net benefit. That future project was much more compatible with redevelopment of the area and a big hospital complex. And the existing park was underneath the interstate and, had two different pieces to it. And we relocated that to an area that better served the community. And it was a really positive thing. So, that's the kind of a situation where you can maybe make something like this happen. We've had projects where we've taken holes on golf courses and replaced them somewhere else. You can do a net benefit to historic property, right? And in the most challenging situation, you have an adverse effect to the historic resource, but you still are able to reach the determination with SHPO that it's an overall net benefit to the resource. And, for those of you that have any, the Paris Pike project in Kentucky and the stacked stone walls, that was the very first example of a net benefit with an adverse effect. So let's look at a couple more examples then about net benefits. I just got this one within the last couple of, maybe 2 weeks ago from GDOT. So as my understanding, this is the only net benefit GDOT has done. It was from back in like 2007. And this is the Greenway Trail in Alpharetta. And it actually goes north-south, so I had to rotate the graphic, but Kimball Bridge Road, and the trail used to come up and over the bridge and then go back down. The project was to replace the Kimball Bridge Road bridge. So the replacement structure was longer and it allowed the trail to be relocated and stay down underneath the trail, underneath the bridge and along the water. And instead of having to come up and cross at a traffic light kind of thing. So, that's textbook net benefit. It's a benefit to that trail. It has to be a benefit to the resource. Now, GDOT realized benefits by, increased pedestrian safety and traffic operations and a bunch of other things. But again, we've got to get the benefit to be to the resource. Here's a current map of the Greenway Trail. And, these days it's like I had something about 8-mile network that goes from Mansell Road to Windward. So if folks know Alpharetta, I pulled this off of Alpharetta's website last week. So really popular, a lot of users. This is the Big Creek area right in here by number 3. I'm sorry, the Kimball Bridge area. So if you zoom into that, you can see kind of all the different connections that have come to be because of the trail not going over our bridge in the future, as it did in the past kind of thing. You've got an elementary school here. You've got Rock Mill Park that was created. So again, a lot of future amenities that may or may not have come into play if we, well, let's say it this way, our project helped these things come to a realization. And, that's a great thing. So the point about it is, like with net benefit, if you avoid it, and maybe you can avoid it, but you miss an opportunity to make it a better future scenario. And that's different than any of the other programmatics. And because of that, I can sell a project like this every day that is a good project that the community wants to have. Another example, and I show this one, this is from Pennsylvania. I show this one just to prove to you that net benefit is not limited to small projects. You know, this is outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is a $94 million project to improve operations and connectivity and add capacity over the river. You've got US 422 that comes in from this upper northeast side, and over here this is 23 that all this redesign was going on. This thing here is Valley Forge National Historic Park. You know, Valley Forge is some 3,400 acres. It is both recreation and historic. So you have to meet both of those criteria when you're talking about officials with jurisdiction and this and that. You can't really see it a lot on this graphic, but there was a road right here existing, a local road that went through the park that didn't really have any, you know, it wasn't people going to the park, and lots of truck traffic, this and that. Ultimately, this redesign took that road out of the park, reconstructed the park's entrance, reconnected. This bridge here was a bicycle pedestrian thing that was knocked down years ago or you know, wasn't existing, rebuilt that, connected some of these bicycle and pedestrian network from the park and down into, you know, the Philadelphia suburbs. At the end of the day, adverse effect under Section 106 to the historic property, but overall a net benefit. This land within the yellow shaded area was a combination of DOT and local government right-of-way. This land was returned back to the park. A new entrance was constructed. The traffic that used to go through the park that wasn't going to the park was removed. So lots of good stuff here. But again, from the DOT aspect, much better traffic operations, more roadway capacity over the bridge, blah, 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 blah. But I've got to be able to make the point the benefit is to the resource, to the historic property or the recreation property. So, you know, I would certainly tell you that if we tried to advance this project prior to 2005 and the creation of net benefit, we would have taken a couple of more years to do it. We may or may not have ended up with this alternative. So the fact of how much does it cost me to build a bicycle facility over the water, or, you know, redo the entrance to the park, this and that, weigh those costs against what it would cost you to build a $94 million project 2 more years down the road. And I would tell you that the mitigation and enhancement was less costly. That's my last one on programmatics and net benefits. So again, I'm right here. I'm on the verge of having to go to individual. Any relevant questions that I need to speak to? Okay. Let me get through individuals. I think I got a couple. I got 1142, so I think I'll be able to get through this and we can check out all the questions and maybe have even some time for more if we need to. So if I've exhausted all of my options about exceptions and de minimis and programmatic, and I gotta do an individual, we're back to this, you know, pre-2005, only the first 2 bullets. And, you know, the first one is I've got to prove there's no feasible and prudent avoidance alternative. what's feasible mean? Well, when I ask this in, for people to define it in their own words, I get things like buildable and doable and this and that kind of thing. This is the definition FHWA put in their regulations, again, in 774. An alternative is not feasible if it cannot be built as a matter of sound engineering judgment. So my experience, most anything is feasible. In some of the other trainings, we looked at the divided highways video, which, by the way, is a great thing about construction of the interstate, if you've never heard of that one. But, there's an engineer that gets interviewed there, and he said, I can build anything. You give me enough dollars and dynamite, I can build anything. And again, it's been proven time and time again, we can build some extraordinary things. So, we didn't define feasible or prudent when we produced our FHWA regulations. That Overton Park lawsuit that we had back in 71 pretty much defined it for us. But, most anything is feasible. So it really comes down to a question of prudency. Can you, if feasible is, can you build it? Can you do it? Prudent is, should you? And, should you based on environmental impacts and based on how well it meets the need and purpose and based on the cost and other things. So in FHWA's newest regulations from back in 08, this is how prudent is defined. And this is really, starting to get into some advanced discussion. I mean, individual 4Fs, right now we're doing them primarily because of the bridges and historic district things, but, a true individual 4F evaluation, I used to see several of them a year. I think, right before I left Federal Highway, you'd see one a year, one every couple of years. Like, there are some states that haven't done an individual 4F evaluation in over 10 years. So it is very different. If you're trying to make a case that it's not feasible and prudent to avoid, these are the factors that you're citing. And, people always ask me about cost, and I say to you, cost is certainly a part of the equation, but don't rely on cost alone. We've had courts tell us that a $10 million project and a $50 million alternative is not cost of an extraordinary magnitude. The court pretty much said to us, FHWA, you build $50 million projects every day. Why can't you build one here? So be smart. Say it's cost plus all these other things. It causes X number of more acres of wetland impacts. It causes X number of more displacements. It causes, whatever else. And it doesn't meet the purpose of need as well, and yada, yada, yada. But you put everything you can into that side of the bucket that says, this is why it's not feasible and prudent to avoid. And remember, unlike NEPA, if you get sued on a 4F case, you got to prove this. It's not just about your process. So a court can say to you, you didn't prove to me it was not feasible and prudent to avoid. You need to go back and study some more alternatives. When you're doing an individual, this is just a really quick graphic of the steps involved. And so again, still have our identification and use. We prepare a draft. As we're preparing that, we're doing consultation with folks. When FHWA approves the draft, we have a circulation requirement back to agencies and typically a 45-day comment period. We many times will have a public hearing at this point in the process. We get all that information back and we prepare a final. We've got to get FHWA lawyers to sign off on that final 4F evaluation before the FHWA division office can approve it. And For those of you that have ever worked with FHWA lawyers, they're a very conservative bunch. They do not want to lose a lawsuit, and they evaluate individual 4Fs to a very high standard. Back in the day when I was working on a lot of individual 4Fs a couple years back, there was a statement the lawyers always like to say, we win 85% of the cases that we get sued on, and that's a great statistic, I guess, but it also reveals that, they don't take a lot of risks. So, the environmental folks that have had experience with this process, they know how long it takes. And I'm telling you, if you have to go through this process versus doing one of the other compliance options we spoke of all day today, truly give some consideration to what it's worth to you to say 12 months or 18 months or, maybe a couple years worth of project development time. So that's primarily what I wanted to talk about with this group. Again, the engineers and project managers, we can open it up. We do have almost 10 minutes left. I did want to just remind folks or make folks aware that we are going to do in-person environmental trainings, 2-day sessions that I've worked with Eric and Sandy to get under contract to do. So these are the dates that the 4 sessions are right now planned for. So if you have, environmental persons in your firm or others that want to get down in the weeds and learn a lot more than what we talked about today, I didn't want to send it out. I have the registration links available. I will probably send it out either tomorrow or Monday. We have capacity limits still under COVID, so we've got certain number of spots reserved for GDOT staff. We have a certain number of spots for consultant staff. So there will be a cost to attend this training, but that cost is roughly half or less than what it would cost you to take 4F training from another source. If demand exceeds capacity, we'll work with Sandy and Eric to get some additional sessions. I'm hopeful we'll have to address that. So this is my contact information. Again, if you've got follow-up questions or want to talk about 4F stuff or want to talk about your projects and this and that, I'm always open to it. Can you load the, you can't load the PDH certificate?
Oh, I can send it to Sandy.
Okay. We've had trouble uploading files and I don't understand why. This was the first time tried to do a webinar under Teams. So I'll have to figure that out. I do have a certificate for PDHs. Essentially, it's just I just created something and had Eric and I sign it. My understanding is, PDHs are self-reporting, so you can, Draper's going to send it to Sandy or, we did send it out through ACEC and Jennifer Head, so maybe I'll send the certificate to Jennifer and let her publicize it also. But if you haven't gotten this next week and, need it or want it, then, just send me an email or this or that kind of thing. But give us a few days, to try to get that out. So let me just go back to questions and this and that. Okay, let's, I'm going back to the questions. Okay, so 11:15, Lionel, do mitigation costs on bridge replacement projects come out of the bridge program budget? That's always been a sticking point. There is some language about how you can use bridge funds up to the cost of demolition, and you've probably heard that if you're a bridge guy. And I never liked that. But I didn't really understand it until a bridge guy from Federal Highway told me, I don't want to spend my limited bridge monies on moving bridges. So you can use STP or NH or any other type of funds to facilitate that relocation of a historic structure. Texas does a lot of it, Minnesota these days. And, again, that's something I'm trying to help Jim and the GDOT folks figure out, how are they coming to the table with it? And because up to the cost of demolition is never going to be enough money to relocate the structure. All right, let's keep moving down. I've got some bunch of people registering, bunch of thumbs downs. So Paul Cook, if you can replace the monkey bar impacts so service stays the same. All right, so yeah, Paul's talking about net effect after mitigation. Excellent. Couldn't you move it and provide enhancements as mitigation? Sure. Anne Marie, again, that's, whether you qualify it as mitigation or enhancement, either way, it's something that it either allows us to say it's de minimis and minor, or if we can't say that, is allows us to say it's an overall net benefit. So again, those I think are comments about the second de minimis example. Somebody hits a home run. All right, nobody hits the ball that far, Shelley. No, that excellent. And again, that's where talking with the OWJs is critical. I have some slides in my in-depth presentation, and there's one of a park in Pennsylvania where there's a baseball field and there's a ravine. And we, without talking to them, made the assumption that the best place to put this road was in the ravine, in the southeast corner of the park. And we went to a public meeting and we got crucified because everybody goes to that park to rock climb and nobody plays baseball. So, be smart. Don't get beat up at a public meeting. I've learned a lot of lessons at public meetings, and I think if you get surprised at a public meeting, that's not a good thing. Want the PDF presentation? Yeah, I apologize that we couldn't figure out how to load it in here. Lead-based paint, buyer beware. Again, that's something that ultimately, if and that's one of the things that I want to talk more detail with Amanda, folks over at OES and Eric and Jim, and if we come to an agreement locally with SHPO and with FHWA Georgia Division, and this works best for us, then we should use that agreement as much as we can. Da-da-da. A lot of the other folder. Yeah, again, I apologize about the links. All right, so folks thinking it was worth their time, I appreciate that. Think I'm down to the end of the questions. I don't know. Let me see. I don't know if Eric's still around or not. Let me open up the people thing. He said he probably wasn't going to be able to stay there forever. I don't know. And is there anyone else that has a question or a comment? Sandy, you were key in setting all this up. You want me to unmute you? You want to say anything? Which I don't know why it's so small. Can you unmute Sandy? And Eric, if you're still around, you're more than welcome to come back in. And, again, I'm glad we had a lot of folks here. We had folks from SHPO, we had folks from the Corps, obviously the consultants. We had, over 50 GDOT people here. So again, I've been doing 4F for over 25 years and have seen projects all across the country. And sometimes, you learn from your mistakes and you learn from others and this and that. And it's always good to bounce your ideas off of other folks. So
David, I'm still here, and we want to say thank you to you for giving us your time on 4F. You did a great job, And, it gives us a lot to think about, especially, this is just a, kind of a broad overview, but it kind of gives you the feeling of how complex this particular, law is, and the importance, and I said it at the very beginning, the importance of communication and teamwork between the transportation team, because guess what? An environmentalist can't do it by himself. Neither can an engineer. Neither can project manager. We have to do this kind of work together. And so I think you stressed that a lot, and I really appreciate that.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. And, once you get something approved, if you make changes, make sure you talk about those changes with the environmental folks. I've been here long enough that I can remember the project up in Chatsworth on 52 where we're building the 4-lane bridge out in the middle of nowhere, and we had the endangered species, and the project construction engineer, we knew there were species in the river, and she did too, and there was a little tributary, and she made the decision that she was going to put riprap in that tributary so that the silt didn't come down into the main channel and negatively affect the darters that were in the main channel. Well, when the water rised, where the fish went to spawn? You betcha, right up that tributary, and she essentially prevented that from happening. So I was called to a meeting with Larry Dryhop, Commissioner Moreland. No, Moreland was at Moreland Altobelli at the time. I forget who might have been Harold Linenthal or this, and the Fish and Wildlife Section 9 people showed up, the enforcement people, and they carry sidearms, and they were looking to put somebody in jail. So it is truly remarkable that I still have a career at FHWA after a situation like that. That was back in the David Studstill days. He was there, but again, and she thought she was doing a good thing. So
Yeah,
she
well, David, at least they didn't come to shoot us. So at least that's a plus.
Yep, that riprap had to be taken out by hand. It was somewhere to the tune of $1 million, and FHWA did not participate in that. That's the first time FHWA didn't participate in a federal aid project in, however many years prior to that. So again, if you're around long enough, everybody's got stories. Mr. Roundtree, I remember being at a church with you, giving a presentation to a congregation of, minority folks, and, on a project and this and that. It was, probably one of the first EJ outreaches we've ever done, so again, it's, you learn from your experiences, hopefully. All right. 12 o'clock.
David,
401. There's Sandy. Hi,
real
Sandy.
quick, I wanted to add on that we're going to post the video from today on our training website, and we'll add the PDF as well. So I'll try to email it out to the attendees if I can get a list together, but otherwise it'll be on our website and available there where we've posted our other live events.
Yeah, and I do, like in the registration, I sent you a copy of it, but I hid the email column, so we can essentially create a broadcast list to everybody that's here and send them the slides and the PDH certificate and whatever else you want to.
That would be great. Thank you, David.